Good evening and welcome to tonight's special discussion where we come together to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Armed Conflict, June 19th. Sexual violence affects millions worldwide, leaving survivors with physical and emotional scars, especially in armed conflict situations. But beyond the physical and emotional scars, there is another wound that often goes unseen: stigma. Stigma silences and often hinders survivors from seeking help. Tonight, we shine a light on this critical issue, focusing on awareness raising and enhancing access to services for survivors. I'm now being joined in the studio by Mrs. Rebecca Sule-Bello, addressing sexual violence specialist with the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC. Mrs. Rebecca Sule-Bello, it's good to have you in our studio at this point in time.
Thank you very much. I'm really grateful for this audience.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's nice. Now, to start with, what is sexual violence? Excuse me, and how does conflict increase the risk of sexual violence?
All right. Good evening, viewers. When we talk about sexual violence can denote an act of a sexual nature that is committed against any person, whether male, female, boys and girls, by force, threat of force, or coercion. And that means there is no consent. Whenever there is a coercive environment, there is no consent. It could include rape, sexual slavery, survival sex, so it encompasses a lot of things. Now, it happens whether in peacetime or in conflict situation, but then many a times, conflict increase the risk of sexual violence, and ask me how. It increases the risk of sexual violence because many a times when there is a conflict, there is a breakdown in law and order. And so it increases the perpetration of sexual violence. Many a times communities along their displacement pathways, they could be victims of sexual violence. When they come to a displacement settings, there's also lack of proper facilities, like there's no decent accommodation, there are no doors and windows in their accommodation, there's a distance between where they stay to the bathroom, for instance, so it exposes their risks of sexual violence. Now, there is another arm of economic vulnerability as a result of conflict that exposes them to other forms of sexual violence, including survival sex. So this is how conflict increases the risks of sexual violence.
This is unfortunate, I must say. Now, what are the consequences of sexual violence, and what are some of the most harmful impacts that survivors face because of stigma, especially in conflict-affected settings?
Yes, sexual violence has devastating consequences. It ranges from the medical or physical consequences, such as contracting sexually transmitted diseases, such as HIV and AIDS, gonorrhea, and then also there are also issues relating to getting pregnant. Getting pregnant, unplanned or unwanted pregnancy can lead to unsafe abortions. Abortion is illegal in Nigeria, so it results into unsafe abortion, which can also lead to infertility. It can also result into death. Then we have also the psychological impact or consequence of sexual violence, where we have issues relating to trauma. Trauma can lead to distress, anxiety, lack of sleep, blood pressure, and then we have also what we call the social consequences. Now, the social consequences include things like isolation, abandonment by families or by communities. It could include stigmatization, discrimination. And there is the economic arm or the economic consequences of sexual violence that result in lack of means of livelihood. It affects the means of livelihood of not only the survivor, but also the family. So all these layers of consequences affect the family, affect the individual.
So it can go beyond the survival.
Beyond the survival, yes. And you were talking about stigma. Stigma is one of the devastating consequences of sexual violence that even after these consequences has really passed, after the conflict, it still lingers. Yeah.
All right. Ms. Rebecca, what is the 19th of June all about, and what is the International Committee of the Red Cross focusing on this year?
All right, so talking about stigma, the 19th of June 2025 or the 19th of June as a whole is an international day that is being marked like the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Armed Conflict Situation. This is being declared by the United Nations, and all over globally it is being marked. Now for the ICRC this year we're focusing on the theme that says shifting the stigma, preventing and protecting survivors of from sexual violence. So what is stigma? And then
is that the theme?
Yes, so this is a theme for this year's
that's a great
commemoration. Yeah, and I think it is an opportunity for us to raise awareness within communities about stigma, how it affects survivors, what different stakeholders can do to address this menace that is eating up in our communities. Yeah,
I must say kudos to the ICRC for choosing that impactful theme.
Thank you very much.
Now, what do we understand by stigma when it comes to sexual violence, and how does it show up in our own communities?
Okay. Now, stigma can be seen as a kind of a set of beliefs, usually mostly negative beliefs, that affects a person or group of persons. Then I asked, what are some of these negative beliefs that surround survivors of sexual violence? Many a times it includes like victim blaming languages. When a person is a survivor of sexual violence, communities begins to blame the person instead of blaming the perpetrator. So there's a shift from the perpetrator to the victim. And then it encompasses things like isolation. People refuses to socialize with the survivor. People name calling, oh, she's a prostitute. But then people do not really consider that she is a victim and a survivor of sexual violence. And there is issues relating to abandonment. Now, it also affects different areas of the survivor's life. It showcases in isolation, in abandonment, in discrimination. So that is what stigma
Even if it's not the fault of the person, in most cases that's the fault of the survivor.
Yes, even if it is not the fault of the survivor, there is a shift because of some cultural or traditional beliefs that really reinforces,
especially in this part of the world.
Yes,
yes. All right, let's go ahead.
So this is how what stigma is and how it also affects survivors.
This is unfortunate, but I'm sure the ICRC is doing something about that. What's
Yes.
the ICRC doing? Because the act itself on the person, it's cumbersome, it's laborious for that person, let alone, people joining other issues, adding salt to injury.
Yeah.
It's so fortunate.
Yeah.
I hope the ICRC is doing something about that.
Yes. So the ICRC is doing a range of work or range of activities to address sexual violence as a whole, including stigma. Now, we address sexual violence from the different responses. For instance, we have what we call the prevention. How do we prevent sexual violence? Especially because we work in an armed conflict situation, is an international humanitarian organizations that work within armed conflict framework. So we focus more on sexual violence that is linked to armed conflicts. So in our prevention work, we do engage with parties to the conflict to remind them of their obligations under relevant bodies of law, such as international humanitarian law that prohibit the acts of sexual violence. Now, this is another arm. Then we also engage in training sessions, different range of audiences, including weapon bearers on sexual violence, retreating their role as protectors, retreating their role also as first responders. Then we have another layer where we respond, where we do what we call the risk reduction activities. How do we reduce the risk exposure of the population from sexual violence? And I give classical examples within conflict settings. If a particular conflict is affected by armed conflict, and then the population have to walk a distance, civilian population have to walk a distance to be able to access water, and it exposes them to risks of sexual violence, the ICRC can devise assistance activities. For instance, we can go to the community and drill a kind of a borehole. When we drill borehole, it will reduce the rate at which population have to walk a distance to be able to access water. So we have reduced the risk exposure of this population. Then we have another arm of work where we call the response. If sexual violence has already taken place, how do we respond to the multifaceted need of the survivor? Because
the deed has already been done. What is now left, I think, is to provide solution.
Yes.
A durable one for that matter. Please go ahead.
Sexual violence is a medical emergency. Survivors should be able to seek care within 72 hours. Why? To avoid or to prevent sexually transmitted diseases, like I mentioned, among the consequences, and also get support in terms of mental health and psychosocial support. So one of the key arm of our work is we have primary health care centers that we support in Damboa, Dikwa, Ran, and Munguno. In these primary health care centers, survivors can be able to access free medical care for that is victims of sexual violence can access free medical care in these services. Another thing we do is the mental health. In partnership with the Nigerian Red Cross Society, we also do what we call the Victims of Violence program. It's a kind of a program where we ensure that we support the mental health and psychosocial well-being of the survivors. Now, among other arm of our work, we engage different stakeholders in training sessions, in awareness raising sessions. We also have what we call the network of focal points across who are NRCS, Nigerian Red Cross Society, across different divisions in, let's say, in classical example, in Borno State, where their role include engaging in sensitization sessions within communities, in training other NRCS volunteers, in mapping referral services. Now, referral is one of the key arm of our work in the sense that we don't have the capacity to be able to respond to all the needs of the survivors. So what we do, we can be able to refer to different organizations to ensure survivors access the necessary care they needed. Yeah, and I think this session like this is also part of our work in raising awareness not only on sexual violence but on stigma as well.
That's great, Rebecca. Now, stigma doesn't only affect the survivor, it can hurt their families too, isn't it?
Yes.
Please tell us, in what ways does this happen?
All right, now stigma or the fear of stigma can lead to different things. It can lead to isolation, it can lead to rejection, it can create mental health and other health related issues.
How about suicidal thoughts?
Yeah, so there are, in fact, this is one of the key. Because of the mental health impact of stigma on the mental health, it can lead to suicidal thought. Because in some communities, once you are a victim of sexual violence, it is a death sentence. So there is what we call, in communities, call it the honor killing. People decide it is better for them not to live than to, it is better for them to die than to live and linger with the stigma or with the what is it called, the mark of being a victim of sexual violence. So this is part of the way stigma affects survivors. And like I mentioned, it does not only affect the survivor, it also affects the family of the survivor, it affects the communities, and then it can also limit
can you elaborate on that?
Okay, it can limit what we call the livelihood of
how does it extend to, the family and, by extension, the larger community?
So imagine a person is a victim of sexual violence. Automatically, there's this name calling, oh, she's a victim of sexual violence, or he's a victim of sexual violence, because men can also be victims.
Even if it's not the person's fault.
Yes.
And in most cases, it's usually not the person's fault.
Yes. So in many instances, you find out that the community, there is these allegations that people will not want you or their children or their families to associate with the family of the survivor, or sometimes with the community where we have victims of sexual violence. Many are times that the breadwinner, it could limit their livelihood, in the sense that if previously this is what they do, survivor might find it difficult because of shame, because of fear of stigmatization. The family, the survivor might find it difficult to really go out to look for his livelihood. And if he or she goes out, you find out that the people that patronizes him or her will reduce drastically. Many people that comes to buy things from the person might not come out, and by implication, it affects the person's livelihood and also that of the family. And where
do you think such problems lies? Do you think it has to do with the psyche of, the people, in this kind of community, or what's your take on that?
I think this is more or less linked to myths and stereotypes. There are myths and stereotypes relating to sexual violence that really does so much harm in our communities. You find out that a person, a victim of sexual violence, the person says, oh, why did you provoke the perpetrator? Why did you go there by this time of the day? What are you wearing? What did you do? Why did you do this? Why didn't you fight back? So there is a shift, a drastic shift from the perpetrator to the victim. So there is what we call the victim blaming. Exactly. So we call it the victim blaming. So this is really something that is eating our society.
Even if it's obvious that it might not be the person's fault.
Yes. Of course, it's not the fault of the survivor.
In most cases.
I will say well, this is also a subject of debate, but I think it is not the fault of the survivor. We should not blame the survivor. We should find ways of supporting the survivors, ways to fight the stigma, where to show empathy to the survivor and support, not judgment. Yeah.
All right. Now, Mrs. Sule, what role do the government, community leaders, faith groups, educators, and even the media play? That's talking about breaking the cycle of stigma.
Yes, it is a collective responsibility. We all have a role to play, whoever you are, whether...
Starting from you and I?
Starting from you and I. Yes, we have a collective responsibility to fight the stigma, to ensure we support survivors, government, local leaders, traditional leaders, authorities, like humanitarian organizations. We have a collective role to play in addressing stigma, in fighting the stigma. How? First of all, I want to talk about debunking myths and stereotypes. We have the role to debunk myths and stereotypes relating to sexual violence in our communities. Apart from debunking, is raising awareness. We need to raise awareness in our communities about the impact or the harmful impact of stigma, how stigma affects the community, how stigma affects survivors. This is something we really need to do. Then government needs to draw laws and policies that fight stigma. What kind of policies are we drawing that addresses stigma in our communities, in our environment? We need to also show support. We need to believe the survivor. Many a times we don't believe the survivors. Many a times we don't respect their wishes. Many a times we don't prioritize their physical and psychological well-being. Many a times we end up being the ones gossiping around them, sharing information around them. We don't keep their information in a confidential way. We talk about them anywhere, and it limits their ability to access services. Yeah.
Mrs. Rebecca, I'm sure this interface we're having is going to serve as a ray of hope to a lot of people out there. So where do you think survivors can get help in Maiduguri and environs?
Like I mentioned, sexual violence is a medical emergency. There is a great need to access care. So within some of the locations, ICRC is supporting primary health care centers in Mungunu, in Dikwa, in Ran, and in Dambwa. Free access medical care for victims and survivors of sexual violence, including the clinical management of rape. Now, when we come to the Maiduguri metropolis, we have the Nelewa Sexual Assault Referral Center in the Blumkutu Hospital. We equally support not only the medical care, but as well as also the counseling sessions. So this is done through the collaboration with the Ministry of Women Affairs. And in the Nelewa Sexual Assault Referral Center, one of the key things is in terms for us to enhance access to services for survivors. Many a times we try to provide some kind of a stipends, like transport reimbursement, so that it will enable survivors to come back for their counseling sessions in order to support their mental health and psychosocial well-being.
So you do give them stipends?
Yes, we do give them stipends. And at the same time also, which is also part of a way for us to enhance services, there is a toll-free number we have provided. This number is free of charge. Survivors can be able to call in, so if they have any challenge, and at any point in time, it works 24 hours, 7 days, and then is a toll-free. Toll-free means that if they call, they wouldn't be charged credits. And then even if they had no credit on their phone, they can still be able to call and access the number. And if it is okay, I can provide the number.
Please call out the numbers.
All right, so the number is 080 000 30 4050. And I call the number again, 080 000.
Can you slow down?
Okay. 080 000 30 4050. It is not the usual number,
and I'm sure we have the numbers displayed on the screen.
Yes, it is being displayed. All right. And it is not the accurate number. The normal number is 11 digit, but this is a 12-digit number.
Okay, we have the numbers displayed on the screen.
Yes, we do.
All right. Tell us, let's talk about this very critical component. Tell us the level of feedback you're getting from the community.
Okay, so I think one of the avenues the ICRC or the platform ICRC provide is a way to be able to get feedback from the communities. It could be complaint, it could be feedback, it could be request. As part of our approach to accountability, we want to be accountable to the population we serve. So we equally have a toll-free number where communities, wherever you are, you can be able to call and lay complaint or make comment or make commendation to even if you have concerns relating to our work. And this number is also a toll-free number, meaning that you can call for free. Is 080 5000 4000. And I call the number again.
Let's take it slowly.
080 05004000. We equally have the number displayed on the screen. You can call this particular number from Mondays to Fridays from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and you can be able to speak in Kanuri, in Hausa, in English, and in Pidgin.
You have all the interpreters.
Yes, there's somebody that will be able to respond accordingly.
International Committee of the Red Cross for us. All right. If you are to give an advice, to your community on how to support survivors, what will that be?
Well, if I'm advising communities and viewers out there on how to support survivor, basically it will be that first, we should live here remembering that every time we choose to listen, we choose to believe, we choose to include and support someone who is a victim of sexual violence, we are shifting the stigma. We are helping them to be to strive, and by implication, we're helping our communities as well. We should end what we call the victim blaming, where we shift the blame from the perpetrator to the survivor. So this is something we should be able to create an environment where we support survivors to enable them thrive. We should respect their choices. We should respect their wishes. We should keep their information in a confidential manner. Basically, the survivor upholding the survivor-centered approaches. We should make the survivors feel welcome. We should not be the carriers of all the things that have affected them. Yes, it's good for us to talk about issues relating to sexual violence, but only to raise awareness and not the other way around where we backbite and we gossip about survivors. And if there is one thing I want to state is that we should always remember that the healing journey of a survivor is not theirs to walk alone. We all have a collective responsibility to be able to support them, whether we are families, whether we are their neighbors, whether we are community leaders and even authorities. We should also always remember that we need to replace judgment with empathy, and we also need to replace silence with support.
How about, I will also want you to place high premium on this particular issue, apportioning blame.
Yes. Victim blaming.
Because come to think of this, I have been violated sexually. Is that not enough, let alone apportioning blame? So please shed more light on that.
Yes. So I think this reinforces the trauma. Sexual violence as a role has its own consequences. Now it brings additional layer of consequences. So apart from the medical, the psychological, the other things that the act of the sexual violence itself has on you, then there is the other layer of victim blaming. What was she wearing? Why didn't she shout? Why did she provoke him? Why didn't she cry? And then there is the other, when we are reacting to a disclosure, when people are telling us about the incident of sexual violence, we are trying to analyze, is it true? Is it false? No, she is not showing emotions. How can she be talking to me that she is a victim when she's not crying? It's not everybody that has to cry. We all have different ways of responding to emotions. You and I can be of the same parent. We can lose one of our parents. You can cry profusely and I don't cry. Does it mean I don't feel the pain? No, it doesn't mean. So we should also not think that because a survivor is not crying or does not looks frightened or does not look agitated, that doesn't mean it is not true. So cardinal responsibility is our ability to believe the survivor. We need to really believe in the survivor. It has really a key role to play. Yeah.
All right, Mr. Baker, what is it that the International Committee of the Red Cross will never compromise as far as the issue of sexual violence is concerned? That's before we let you go.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think the International Committee of the Red Cross has guiding principles. We have our humanitarian principles, which are humanity. We do our work for humanitarian purposes. We also have what we call neutrality, where we do not take side because we work in an armed conflict situation. So we do not take side between parties to the conflict. And the other part is impartiality. We ensure that in our response, we do not discriminate either on the basis of sex, religion, ethnicity, tribe, or any form of differences. But then one major thing we don't compromise is the survivor-centered approach, where we respect the wishes of the survivor, where we prioritize their safety, both physical and psychological safety, and at the same time also we do not discriminate, and cardinally, confidentiality.
Confidentiality.
The confidentiality of the survivor is key. Yeah.
your biggest constraint in the course of, doing this work of, protecting survivors?
Well, I think constraint comes
in a nutshell. We're rounding up.
Well, one of the key, we have certain approaches that help us work in our communities where we work is acceptance. We ensure that we have the acceptance of the people where we work, and I think we want to really say a big thank you in the sense that we are trying, this is something that we are working on. It's really a work in progress, and we want to really appreciate all the effort we have and the feedback we have been getting.
Mrs. Bello, I wish we could go on and on and on, because of how interesting this discussion, has been. At this point, I'd like to say a very big thank you to you for being part of the program. It has been rewarding, engaging, and so impactful, I must say.
It is my pleasure. Thank you very much for hosting me.
All right, we've actually been discussing with Mrs. Rebecca Bello, addressing sexual violence specialist with the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC. Thank you for being part of the program. Till we come your way again some other time.